Hey, Mandy,
Hello.
how's it going?
Good. Happy Monday.
Happy Monday to you as well. How was your weekend?
It was good. It was wonderful and busy with kids'
Mhm.
sports and
Mhm.
family, but it was great.
Good,
And
good,
we have
good, good.
another one next weekend, exactly the same.
Predictability.
Yeah.
Sometimes these days I relish a little predictability because we're talking about uncertainty. There's
Yep.
so much around us that's uncertain and unpredictable. Yeah. Yeah, my weekend was lovely as well. We spent much of Saturday in the woods hiking. You know how much I
Uh,
love that. I live for that to replenish the soul. And then we had a family Zoom chat, Zoom conversation where we get to especially check in with the older family members, see how they're doing and get caught up and stuff. So that was good. And then I have a young friend who has a new baby. So I got to make her a meal yesterday, get some packing done. So all this packing and moving and stuff,
yeah.
it's a little crazy right now.
Uh,
So it falls right in the midst of what we want to talk about. So last time we talked about uncertainty,
hmm
what it looks like, what it feels like. And I think we finished our conversation really underlining that uncertainty is here to stay. It's always a part of our existence. It's just that sometimes we're experiencing a lot more than other times. And right now, we're experiencing a lot. And yet, in the midst of the uncertainty, we've got to make important decisions because every day our lives is about a series of decisions that we make. And some of them are, high stakes decisions. Others are, what am I going to have for breakfast? That's important, but it's not necessarily a high stakes decision like buying or selling your house
yeah.
or changing jobs,
Yeah.
right? Or is this the right time to get married?
Yeah.
Those are big stuff.
Yeah. It's one of the biggest challenges for me is continuing to make decisions when I haven't wrapped up something that's still lingering. So it's
Mm.
almost like I can't make any decisions until I can make all decisions.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. And you and I know that that's a trap,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because that's never going to happen, you know.
Yeah.
So I was thinking right now, a simple thing like we are moving and we have so many friends that we want to meet with and hang out with and kind of say our Austin goodbyes before we leave. And just that exercise of deciding where we'll meet, when we'll meet, how many of us will meet together. Oh my gosh, it's so
Yeah.
different than it would have been, say, 2 years ago. 2 years ago, I'd be like, yeah, I'm throwing a dinner party on Saturday evening, dinner party on Sunday, as many friends as can come. We're just gonna hang out and eat and drink and have a merry old time, or we'll just go to our favorite restaurants and hang out. Not so much right
Yeah.
now.
It all looks different now.
It all looks so different because now I have to think about, okay, who's okay with actually going to a restaurant for a meal right now? And if we are going to a restaurant, do they have outdoor dining?
hmm
And if they do have outdoor dining, how many of us do we actually want to go? And if we're not going to a restaurant, can we do something at home? And if so, how many of us? It's got to be outside, all that stuff. So that simple process of planning to have time with friends to just hang out and enjoy each other's company. Now we've got to think a little bit more deeply about it. Because I have friends, for example, who have underlying health issues and are concerned about their vaccine waning right now and wanting to make sure that they get their booster shot before, indulging in socializing. And that's real, right? So a simple decision like this has been made more complex by the uncertainties around us.
Yeah. Yeah. My son is turning 6 next week and his birthday party is this Saturday.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went to bed last night thinking, please nobody get sick this week so that we can have the birthday party. I
Yeah.
just I'm like, please let's have a sick-free week, even if it's just a cold or
Mm-hmm.
allergies. It
Mm-hmm.
still brings about I've got to get a test. I've got to
Yes.
pull him out of school. We can't have the birthday party. And so
Yeah.
a lot of things that used to be, I guess they seemed more simple, are just
Yeah,
not.
it seemed more simple. Yeah,
Yeah.
because not only does uncertainty change how we make decisions, change the basis of our decisions, it brings problems of its own,
Yeah.
right? The hurdles that we have to jump over, the hoops that we've got to jump through just to do simple things. And sometimes we may say, well, it's just one other thing you got to do. Sometimes that one other thing can be a little challenging for some folks. So the uncertainty brings layers with it. And for many of us, it triggers all kinds of emotions.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Right?
and I have to keep reminding myself that if it wasn't the pandemic, or XYZ, it would be something else.
It will be something else.
So
Yes.
that's just
Yes.
life.
Yes.
And yes, a pandemic is rough and it's new and it's hard and it's uncertain, but there would be another uncertain thing to deal with as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that the challenge I hear from a lot of folks, Mandy, is especially around the emotions that are triggered as a result of the uncertainty and sometimes the complexity that comes with the uncertainty, is that it gets in the way of folks actually making decisions and it can actually cause us to be irrational.
Yeah.
So we're making decisions based on how we're feeling and perhaps sometimes incorrect or inappropriate labels that we're putting on what we're feeling. So we'll become irrational. Other times, for us and for other folks, we can actually feel paralyzed and not make a decision
Yeah.
because of what's swirling around us. So then it becomes really important, I think, to pay attention to what are these emotions that we're feeling as we're going through uncertainty, and really to recognize and accept that, listen, for all of us, or probably most of us, uncertainty brings some amount of anxiety and even fear,
Mm-hmm.
right? And once we've acknowledged that awareness allows us then to do what? To manage the emotions that comes with it. And because we're moving so fast these days, sometimes we don't slow down enough to first acknowledge the emotions, label them correctly, so that then we can self-manage, so that we can then get into that rational space to make those decisions more effectively. So I think, as I listen to folks talk about this a lot these days, what I'm gleaning from this is that most people are more challenged by the triggers, the emotional triggers
Mm-hmm.
that comes with uncertainty than by uncertainty itself.
So where do those come from?
When you say those, what do you mean? Those what?
The emotional triggers. Is it experience you've had in the past? Is it because I have my definite,
Mm-hmm.
you know, my default reactions to uncertainty. And then I kind of
Mm-hmm.
have to identify it and then reprogram because, I don't do well with, I typically don't do well with uncertainty. I think I've gotten a
Mm-hmm.
lot better, but to me, it brings up that I don't have all the answers
Mm-hmm.
and that I'm lacking in something or I'm
Yeah.
lacking control. It feels like a deficit of some sort.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm sure it's based on my own experiences and my own makeup or whatever, but I guess when you're talking to people about how
Mm-hmm.
they're sitting in their uncertainty,
Mm-hmm.
where do those triggers come from?
Yeah. So I'm hearing some of the same things that you're sharing, that we don't like not having all the answers. We don't like having missing pieces to the puzzle, like what's coming next hour, next week, next day. Even among many of the leaders that I work with, the fact that they can't predict sometimes on an hourly basis what's coming down the pike for them and their team, it rattles the team, when the reality is there's no permanent security in the world because there's no permanent knowing of everything.
Yeah.
Last time we talked about, listen, let's accept that uncertainty is part of our existence. And so if we're going to navigate and manage uncertainty well, then we've got to develop some tolerance for that. And included in that tolerance, it would be some sort of framework for thinking about uncertainty, and then some process for navigating. I do this, then I do that, that sort of thing. The emotional side of it, those emotions are familiar to all of us from different things as well. We feel fear and anxiety, and sometimes even a sense of panicking for other things, right? So when you think of your own experience, what are some other things that makes you feel anxious or fearful, aside from uncertainty?
I think, there are some very physical things that I get anxious about, heights in
Yeah.
general.
Yes.
Any kind of illness, I'll go deep and dark to this could be it. This, even when my kids
Yeah.
get sick before COVID,
Yeah.
uh, I think when I don't know, I can't read somebody and know how they're
Mhm.
doing is very
Mhm.
unsettling to me.
Mhm.
If I can't tell what's going on, if I don't know how someone reacted to something, then again, it's that not knowing that I get very anxious, or fearful.
Yeah.
A lot of stuff with my kids too. I get fearful when my kids get fearful.
Yeah.
But at the
Sorry,
office,
I'm gonna have to stop for a second. I'm hearing noise behind me. I'm seeing Peter walking behind
yep,
me. So
Peter's in
I
trouble.
pause. I pause. So I thought I did not stop it. He'll have to cut that piece out for us.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. So it sounds like, Mandy, when all these things are happening, there's a sense of insecurity that you're feeling
Oh, yeah.
because you're not in control of stuff, which we all feel, right? This move for us has stirred up a level of insecurity in me that I have not experienced probably in decades. There are days when I'm like, Lisa, what is going on with you? Why are you feeling this way? And I realize that I'm leaving this sort of cocoon that I've created for myself after a couple of decades in the city, where we have a really amazing network of friends. We're honest to goodness. There are friends who I could call, and they're not blood family members, though some of us, we think of each other as sisters because we've gotten so close. I could call any time of day or night and ask for anything I need, and they're going to drop what they're doing and they're going to be here in minutes. And to leave that and go to a new place where now I have to recreate that and recreate it, mark you, under very uncertain circumstances, where COVID says you're not going out as much, you're not going to a lot of the engagements that you would be involved in to meet people, to do things with others, and to establish new relationships, right? So while I wasn't thinking of that at a conscious level, my subconscious was processing that, and it was causing my body to feel like, oh my gosh, are you guys sure about what you're doing? Right? So it's that insecurity that came along with the uncertainty about what is life going to be like away from this secure base that I've created with my friends 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 30 minutes away from me, who could be available when I need them.
Yeah. My husband and I went to dinner on Saturday, which was
Mm-hmm.
so necessary because we just don't have a lot of time to talk right now.
Mm-hmm.
We just don't.
Wow.
We work, we parent, we go to bed.
Mm-hmm.
And it was
Mm-hmm.
so needed for us to go. But I told him that, I've been having kind of a difficult time with who I am professionally. Where am I going to
Yeah.
go? What am I going to do? And I said,
Mm-hmm.
the reason why it's been so hard is because so much of my identity and
Mm-hmm.
worth has been placed on who I have been at work. for so long. And the pandemic
Yeah.
really shook things up for me because I turned my focus to my family, which is a great bonus. But so much of my identity has been tied
Mhm.
to work Mandy
Yes.
and the achievements work Mandy has.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that's hard. And
Yes.
so now I'm in this new place where I am extremely insecure because work Mandy has changed.
Yes.
And that's a new place.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
this new Mandy wants different things and has
Yes.
different values and has come out a different type of leader and a different type of employee. And it's a very uncomfortable spot to be in after 11 years.
What you're feeling, and I was feeling as well, and to a certain extent still feeling some of that. The reality is we ought to expect this, right? We ought to expect that big changes like this, lots of uncertainty um, in front of us and ahead of us, that we are going to feel shaken. As you said, this whole your whole identity, you're trying to figure out who is this new Mandy, and so that comes with a certain amount of uncertainty, with which makes us feel unstable, which makes us feel a bit of anxiety and fear. But that's a part of it, right? Because we feel like we're probably losing some amount of control.
Yeah. So how did you,
Mhm.
and I'm sure we'll get into this, but you made this huge decision,
Mhm.
you know, how did you keep moving
Mhm.
and know that it was the right decision?
So I've always acted on this premise that the moment of absolute certainty for any decision that I have to make will never come.
Yeah.
It just won't. The only time we're going to get that is if we are acting on some algorithm or something that says, 1 + 1 = 2, and not the strange, funny math like my husband does, like Peter does with his stuff, where 1 + 1 could be equal to a lot of other different things. No, this is 1 + 1 = 2. Unless we're working by something like that, which then says this is going to be a definite result, we have to accept that there's some amount of risk that we're taking, right? So, for example, this big move, it's an amazing opportunity for us as a family to do this. And yet I know that there's going to be some challenges with it. And so I shifted my thinking to say, now I'm focusing more on the opportunities that this provides for us as a family, all that comes with that, and the degree of risk that comes with it, that I now have to figure out how I'm going to cope or navigate through that.
Mhm.
How am I going to cope with being away from my friends? Which I never even thought that I'd be asking myself this question. So it's surprising me that I'm going through it at this level, and that it's not something that, oh, after a few days I'd be fine. No, this has been weeks of me saying, oh my God, I can't believe we're doing this.
Mhm.
Now I'm in a different place, which is acceptance. Yes, we're doing this. We have gone through this process before where we've moved away from our base and we've created amazing relationships. So now I've got to think about, okay, what is it I now need to be doing to add to my friendship base? Because my friends will always be there, even though we're away from each other physically. Because one of the gifts of the pandemic is exactly that, that we now realize that we can actually have deep, meaningful connections with the people we love and care about while we're remote, whether it's we're on Zoom or some platform like that, or using phone a lot more. But that shift in my thinking, in my mindset now shifted me into a different place of thinking about where I am and where I'm going, and started alleviating some of the anxiety around it.
And I love to, because you almost put it a little bit mathematical,
Yeah.
which is so awesome because I always loved math and algebra because I had an answer, an exact answer. There
Oh,
was
wow.
never any, I don't know if I told you this, but thought I was going to take the LSAT to be an attorney. And I
Yeah.
hated it because a lot of the questions were, please pick the best answer.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, come on. Like, that's just the
Ah.
dumbest thing I've ever heard, because I could
Oh.
overanalyze every single thing. I want to know, like, black and white, what is the correct answer? But when you said to look at your risks
Mhm.
and define them,
Yes.
because then
Yes.
that gives you that data
Mhm.
that is the thing that you can look at and say, okay, well, if I do this, here's what it's going to look like. If
Yes.
I don't do this, here's what it's going to look like.
Yes. Yes.
And let's make a third column of stuff that I don't even know that might
Right.
happen.
And the thing is, Mandy, we don't spend enough time doing that. And so we stay in this place of sort of wallowing, swirling in the uncertainty because we haven't done enough work evaluating the environment and all the variables involved. You know, who's involved? What's the time frame? How much of this? You know, all that stuff. We haven't done that. All we're looking at sometimes is the emotional experience that we're having with change or impending change and uncertainty. And if that's the primary data point that we're focusing on, we're bent to stay in this place and to feel miserable.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And there are times when and I know this is false and what my brain is telling me, but I almost feel like I have to sit and wallow in that place in
Mm-hmm.
order to earn the answer,
Mm.
which I know is a trick that
Yeah.
my fear and anxiety is playing, but I do at times tell myself, oh, well, this is part of it. You got to sit
Yeah.
here and get through it and just sit in it and wallow in it. And then you'll earn the answer.
Mm. Earn. Why earn? Why earn? And
I
it's
don't,
interesting, you know, some researchers say the anxiety that we feel often in the midst of change and uncertainty, it's actually a data point prompting us to make a decision. Imagine that you're having this experience and say you label that experience anxiety, or you label that experience fear, or you label that experience excitement, or whatever it is, that's a data point that says now you need to do something. But before we do whatever we do, we've got to decide, right? So what if we were to say, okay, I'm feeling this, I'm experiencing this emotionally, and it means it's leading me to someplace else, but I'm the one who's got to take the action. Quite often what happens, and I hear this quite often from my clients as well, is sort of they get carried away with the emotions. Well, as you say, you stay in that place. And that is actually a state of inaction when really the emotions are saying, hey, Mandy, you're ripe for decision making right now. You're ripe to do something, which for most of us is really might be to shift our thinking. You know, researchers at what they call again, Decision Innovation Incorporated, they do a lot of work around decision making. And they would say that decision making is actually the process of reducing uncertainty. Isn't that interesting?
mm-hmm.
The process of reducing uncertainty about the solution or options that we're looking for. So for them, it's decision is about looking at all the options that are in front of you and carefully evaluating that. And as you evaluate those options, the risk and the opportunities will become clear. And to a certain extent, you're reducing the uncertainty by bringing the things to the certain options to the surface that are the most viable ones for you. And if you were to even assess the emotions that one's experiencing in that process, we'll see the levels of anxiety going down. So for years, probably about 10 years ago or so, maybe almost a decade and a half, I practiced in collaborative law as a psychologist supporting lawyers in collaborative law practice. And one of the things one of the things I had to do was support the clients and the lawyers through the process to stay cognitively aware and managing their emotions well. So the emotions were leveraged to help them in the process rather than getting in the way of the process. And as we're doing that, we're going through identifying folks' interests. Why are they in? So they're in a negotiation process. Collaborative law is an alternative dispute resolution process. And so most of these clients were going through divorce. So often we're in a space where they're figuring out how they're allocating their assets or how they're managing their children's schedule, how much time they're going to be with one parent or the other. Imagine how emotions get in the way of something like that, right? You're talking about your family, you're talking about what you've worked for all your life. And so part of what we did was to help them stay in this clear place of focusing on what's not interesting, but what their interests are, what their needs and desires are. And then put all the options on the table that could address those interests and needs. And as we evaluate the option, there's so many times that I could see people's body, the language just changed because they're feeling less anxious, because they now understand fully, okay, so these options really address my interests. And so now they can see a bit more clearly what their life will be or may be next month or next year, because their interests are being met. So it alleviates the distress, the anxiety around that. And so that's what decision-making, healthy decision-making can do for us during times of uncertainty. That we understand the risks and we understand the opportunities that are in front of us.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting too, because I understand that the emotions at play are just part of the data. And
Yeah.
that's very important for me to hear, because I think what I've been doing is placing all of the data on, okay, how do I feel about this? Okay, well, this makes you feel this way, this makes you feel this way, and I've got this data, but I think I'm not diversifying my data at all.
And if you were to diversify, what would be different?
I think to look at the risks, to look at the possible outcomes, to make the decisions I can make, and not just wait on huge decisions because I'm waiting for everything to wrap up in a nice little bow, but make decisions I can make. And it kind of reminds me of procrastination, because as a writer, I would get in these fits of procrastination and say, oh, well, I can't start it today. I'm not ready. I gotta have it in my brain a little bit. But really, my best writing would come when I would just start writing, like just do it. Stop thinking about it and just do it. And a lot of this is I'm just thinking about it and I'm not doing.
Yeah.
And so I need to put pen to paper. I need to get a plan. I need to say, if this is this, then this will do this, and making those smaller decisions.
Yes, absolutely. And notice when you say, I just do it, I just put pen to paper and I do it. Interestingly enough, a little step that you are overlooking that you did make is you decided to write. You actually made that decision. Whatever was swirling around in your head or in front of you, you actually made that decision. And sometimes we don't pause long enough to recognize that I made that decision. I decided that I was going to write despite whatever else was going on. Right? So despite the uncertainty, we decide to do XYZ.
Yeah.
And as we make those decisions and take steps, the uncertainty itself seems less intense, less complex, less of a problem, because guess what? Now we have a little bit more control because the decision making has led us to some sort of action.
Yeah.
So Decision Innovation Incorporated, they have come up with some really good guidelines. I looked at their materials some time ago for a training I was doing with an organization. So I went back and took a look at what are some of the pointers, some of the tips that I would share. So came up with a list. some ideas to consider for times of high decision during uncertainty. So we're going through a rough time, we've got to make decisions. So the first thing is, when we are going through periods of uncertainty, one of the top things that's lacking is information. We don't know. We don't know. We have this puzzle in front of us, and some of the puzzle pieces aren't there. And so we become anxious, afraid, whatever it is. So the first thing is to get as much information as we can. Learn as much as possible about what's in front of us and the options available. You mentioned that earlier. That added information is going to immediately bring down your anxiety. And plus that, it's going to give you additional information to take the next step that you need to make. I'll eliminate this, I'll add this, I'll do this, I'll remove this person, I'll add this person. And so you start to figure that, yeah, this is a bit more in my control than I thought it was, right? And then you can still at the same time identify, but here's this piece that I still don't know. But now you can determine, how can I control for that piece that I don't know? One of the things that my leaders and I talk a lot about, especially since the pandemic, is, hey, listen, things are moving so fast that you're not going to have all the information that you need. And yet work has to go on. Your people have to be able to execute their tasks. So how about we say we're making a multitude of little decisions that's going to lead up to the big decisions that we make. So make those decisions. And then another tip is to reduce the time horizon for decisions. So build a bridge between where you are right now and where you're going. Far too often, we're making the big decisions. That's for 5 years from now, 10 years from now. When right now, we need to make some smaller decisions. I was working with this brilliant young UT student last year, and she's an amazing writer. You'd love some of the stuff that she shared with me. And she is challenged beyond belief about what she really wants to do after college. And that has literally stopped her in her tracks because she can't make that decision. So in one of our sessions, we just did some work around what are some things that she can do right now that would bring her meaning to her life and fulfillment. And interestingly enough, as she started doing that work, making some smaller decisions about how she's going to be managing her writing schedule right now, she's involved in film and theater. As she started plotting that out, you know what happened? She started connecting the dots to, oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. And to watch that being revealed as we're on, on camera together was this beautiful thing. So we didn't start out looking at the big decision she needed to make. We started out about looking at how is she using her time right now? What are some of the things that she wanted to accomplish this semester and this month and this week? And that led her to a bit more clarity on that big decision. Another tip when we're making decisions in a certain time is to avoid taking unnecessary risk. When there are lots of uncertainty in the environment, we need to defer risks that are not in our control. The things that we can control are the things that we should pay attention to. So for example, if we're in tough economic times, then you might want to defer that amazing dream vacation that you and your husband have planned, right? Because the immediate need for your money, probably 6 months, 12 months down the road, if things continue to be tight economically, is going to be your saving that you have there. Whereas sometimes when we're feeling anxious, we make some irrational decisions because we're going by the emotions. So avoid taking those unnecessary risks as much as possible. And then because we do have to take risks, because that's what life is about, a series of choices, and these choices come with risk. When we have to do so, don't combine them. Assess each risk and take a risk at a time. So for example, this might not always be possible for everyone in this situation, but say, for example, you're getting married. It might not be the ideal time to change your job.
Yeah.
It's a double whammy, because as much as getting married is this amazing experience, it also comes with stress. What we call youth stress, which is good stress, but it's stressful nonetheless. And then your job's going to come with that. So it's stress piling up on stress, which then what does that do? fire up your amygdala like
Yeah.
crazy, right? And gets you back into that irrational space, which then impacts what? Your decision-making
Yeah.
ability, right? So that's one tip. Another one is to clarify the uncertainty. What are you uncertain about? The folks at Research Innovation says we should estimate the negative and positive consequences of the risk or the uncertainty. Knowledge of the potential gains and losses can encourage taking risk for good opportunities. Far too often, we throw out the baby with the bathwater and we lose amazing opportunities because we stayed with the negative emotions that, oh, this doesn't feel so great. But we didn't go deeper and did what you mentioned earlier, which is put all the options on the table and evaluate them well, because we might be throwing out the very things we need to help us get over this period of uncertainty that we're in. And then another one is ask yourself, if this happens, then what? To determine the worst case scenario. What could be so bad about that?
Yeah.
What could be so bad about whatever that thing is? Because sometimes the story that we have in our head is as a result of a defense mechanism that we use. We catastrophize, right? We talked about that last time. We build this big, robust story around it, and it becomes a catastrophe. When if we really settle down and say, okay, what would be so bad about, moving across the country? What would be so bad about that? And you look at the risk and the opportunity that comes with it. And when you figure out the worst case scenario, you say, so here are the things that I need to do to make this happen. Our daughter, Chrissy, just last week was in this amazing place where she had 3 offers on the table for jobs, and they were all good offers. But each position, each job with each company came with different things for her. And so she had to be asking herself these questions as she evaluated each and every one of them. I got to tell you, as a mama, I was so proud of her. Was checking in with me and her dad, and tons of texts and phone calls. And she'd share with us her evaluating process. And I'm like, okay, at 24, my mind was not as developed as Chrissy. I mean, I'm like, what? I mean, seriously, the process she went through to carefully evaluate everything and then made the choice. And she made the choice that made me so proud of her. While she's very careful with her money and saving long-term and short-term, she chose a job that she felt would be better for her well-being. Because she evaluated the risk. She was in a weird situation, but she spent the time, and knowing her, she charted things out. She spent the time evaluating everything. And while she knew, because in the last conversation, she knew that there was some risk come to that, she was okay with the worst case scenario for the one that she selected. Talk about making robust decisions during times of uncertainty.
Well, and what you just said, being okay with the worst case scenario.
Yes. Yeah. And then Mandy, another tip I think that's helpful is, as we're going through this decision-making process, be aware of what drives our decision. What are our values?
Yeah.
What's behind this? Why is this why is this feeling this way for us? Because when we are violating our values, believe it or not, it feels horrible. And sometimes when we're moving so fast and things are happening so quickly, if we're not careful, our values are to the side. But when we're violating our values, it speaks to us. So know what your values are and know how they may be intertwined with the interests and the needs that you have. So you're assessing that carefully, because it helps us ensure that we're making the right choices and that we're not looking at risk as if they are boundless or unbounded. Risks are not unbounded. They may feel that way in our mind, but they're not. When we do the assessment, we figure out that they're not. And then another thing is to keep our options open. What else? Who else? What about? put that on the table. And yet, once you've done a bit of that work, then you stop the evaluating, you move on to the decision, knowing fully well that the moment of absolute certainty isn't going to come. There's some decisions that are more impactful on our lives than others. You know, choosing where you go to get a cup of coffee is not as important as where you go to work.
Mhm.
So you wouldn't be spending the same amount of time evaluating where you go to buy your coffee as you would where you'd like to land next for your next job. Though sometimes we make them seem as if they're one and the same, but they're not, right? So
Yeah.
there's a lot that we can do, Mandy, to help us make robust, healthy, effective decisions, even, especially, I would say, during times of uncertainty.
Yeah. Well, and I think, we want to leave listeners with an action, and I
Yeah.
challenge everyone, and myself included. And I've been doing
Mhm.
this lately too, but to really identify your values
Yes.
and write it down, type it up, because
Yeah.
that will fuel your decisions that you need to make over these next few months, over these next few years.
Yeah.
And that's your foundation, really.
Yeah.
Because I know when I divert from those, it the wrong decisions are made. And they might be short-term fixes, quick fixes, but they're not long-term
Mm-hmm.
successes.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Mm-hmm.
would challenge myself and everyone listening to really identify what those core values are.
Yeah.
And I will
Absolutely.
say that, I've been interviewing a ton of people lately because we've had a lot of turnover. And the people I am interviewing and talking with, that is their foundation right now. They want to know our company values.
Yes,
They
absolutely.
they want to know our department values.
Mm-hmm.
Where do we stand on this? What's
Mm-hmm.
important to us? What's culture
Mm-hmm.
like? Which is something we're having to communicate upwards and say, listen, nobody's asking about the 401k right now.
Mm-mm.
Nobody's
Yeah.
asking about, some of these perks that we've had, which are still fabulous, but they
Mm-hmm.
are number one asking me about our values.
They're asking about how you behave and how they should expect you to behave, because the question that they're really asking is this a sandbox I want to play in?
Yes.
Are these folks going to be good playmates for me?
Yeah.
They're asking the right questions,
Yeah.
right? Because again, it is such an uncertain time that it makes us now have to query deeper. So we're satisfying these needs that will allow us to feel more secure,
Yeah.
you know? So again, we go back to the emotions, and
Yeah.
I'd wrap up by saying, Mandy, that because again, there's so much anxiety pervading our environment right now. And yet we know from research that anxiety is not a reason for delaying decision making or for not making decisions. Instead, it is perhaps a reason to make a decision.
Yeah.
So, why am I feeling anxious? Why am I feeling fearful? What are my options? Evaluate the options and then move forward with that decision.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you,
I feel
Mandy.
like
This was good for me today.
this was very good for me today. I hope
Yeah.
it was good for everyone listening. Thank you so much for listening. As usual, you can find us where you get your podcasts. And please subscribe so that you know when we have a new episode. And even though Lisa is moving, it doesn't matter. These podcasts will continue. And we are excited to talk next time. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.